Now I'd like to welcome Dr. Edward Cruz from the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Windsor and Dr. Jennifer Voth from the Research and Evaluation Services at Hôtel-Dieu Healthcare to provide an overview of the research findings from the Caring for the Caregiver study. Over to you, Dr. Cruz and Dr. Voth.
Thanks, Patrick. Good morning, everyone. We, Edward, myself, Clementa, we are all just so thrilled to be here with you this morning and share with you our story about the Caring for the Caregiver study and how it came about and what we found and how it played a central role in creating today's event. So Patrick already mentioned, but our story starts with a group of heroes. It starts with our Hôtel-Dieu Mental Health and Addiction Patient and Family Advisory Council. And this is a group of 10 highly engaged, passionate, knowledgeable individuals who share their expertise. They offer advice to our leadership. They provide input on how we plan and deliver services, mental health and addiction services, in particular at our Hôtel-Dieu campus. And a number of these members are caregivers themselves. So they share that firsthand knowledge of the essential role that caregivers play in supporting their loved one who's living with a mental illness or addiction, including the different informal and certainly underappreciated roles that caregivers play in our healthcare system and for their loved one, including advocate, taxi driver, financial supporter, crisis worker, case manager, the list can go on and on. One council meeting late in 2019, the discussion among the members focused on kind of a central conflict in question, that while caregivers were providing all of these tremendous contributions to our mental health and addiction system, while they're supporting their loved one with all the love and the respect that they deserve, who is supporting them? Who is caring for the caregiver? And we know from research, it tells us that caregiver involvement can result in significant benefits, both for the person who is receiving care and for the person who is giving the care. But we also know from research that caregivers make significant sacrifices in their time, in their resources, in their financial, in their finances, as well as sometimes in their health as they're providing care to their loved one. Studies show in particular that caregivers who support somebody with a mental illness or addiction, they face unique challenges. For example, the day-to-day stressors around supporting someone that has an illness that can be episodic, that can manifest itself sometimes in symptoms that are unpredictable. Many individuals who live with a mental illness or an addiction, they sometimes have co-occurring diagnosis, and that adds complexity to the caregiving role. It can make it confusing for caregivers to know what the illness is, and it can also sometimes make it difficult for clinicians to treat. In cases where a person has been diagnosed with a significant physical health condition like cancer or stroke, I think we can all conjure the image of friends and family, rallying around and providing support, providing that assistance. But in the case of a serious mental illness or addiction, that response can sometimes look quite different. And that stigma and that lack of understanding from the general population can make it so that families don't want to disclose what's going on. And that can be isolating for the caregiver. It can be isolating for the family and certainly for the loved one dealing with the illness. This quote from Ella Amir, I think, really highlights that, without that support, if we're not supporting families and they're just left to fend for themselves as they try and help their loved one recover, as they try and help them navigate the system and access care, and at the same time, keep everybody's well-being intact. And so our advisory council recognized this urgent need, this sort of call to action to support caregivers. And one of our fantastic members, as Patrick already mentioned, proposed the Caring for the Caregiver Conference. And it would have the following goals: that we would provide the right education, we would promote caregiver well-being, and we would support connections, reduce that isolation, make sure people know that they are not alone. But key to this proposal was making sure that the conference would be meaningful, that it would be valuable for caregivers. And so one of the important ways that we could do that would be to consult with caregivers and listen to those who are living the experience. And so that's how the Caring for the Caregiver study came about. It's a research collaborative partnership between Hôtel-Dieu, the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Windsor, and We Spark Health Institute, which is our regional hub for all things research and our champion and our funder of this work. And the purpose of the study was to explore and describe the unique experiences and the support needs of caregivers who are living in our community in Windsor, Essex. And there's been a number of definitions offered of a caregiver in the academic research literature. So we want to be clear that for the purposes of this study, we defined a caregiver as someone who was an informal or unpaid family member or friend, support person of an adult living with a mental illness or an addiction. We utilized two strategies to gather input and feedback from local caregivers. The first was a community-wide needs assessment survey. We conducted that in January and April this year. We had 78 caregivers complete that survey, including demographic information, general health and well-being, and mental health, and caregiver burden. The second strategy was to conduct 21 in-depth one-on-one interviews with caregivers. And here we were gaining a deeper and better understanding of the caregiving experience, the challenges and the rewards, the ways that caregivers manage stress and their support needs. And what our team thinks makes this study so unique is our commitment to putting that research into action, specifically to create change to support caregivers, starting with today's conference. So the findings informed the program, it informed the speakers, the topics, the session content, all to ensure that it would be meaningful for you. We learned from our survey participants that most were over 46 years old, and almost everyone identified as female who completed our survey. Over half were working full-time, and the majority, 72%, reported that the person they were supporting was their child. So the caregiver was the parent or the guardian. 60% of our participants lived in the same house as the person they were providing care for. And you can see along the bottom here, the breakdown of the different clinical diagnoses of the caregiver's loved one, with the most common being anxiety and depression, but addiction, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, personality disorder, eating disorder, and other, including PTSD, dementia, and developmental disability. It's important to note that the caregivers they reported that they were caring for someone that had more than one of these diagnoses. In fact, 77% indicated that their loved one is managing multiple conditions. We learned our caregiver sample was highly involved in the care of their loved one. 32%, so almost a third, were devoting 5 to 10 hours per week providing care. You can see 28% were reporting spending more than 20 hours of their week supporting their loved one. And in addition to this day-to-day demand on caregivers' time, the majority of our participants had told us that they had been caregiving for a long time. You can see 73% reported that they had been a caregiver for more than 5 years. And at the bottom, a couple of graphics there that show some of the indirect impacts or costs of caregiving. A large percentage of our samples showed that they had significant loss of productivity. For example, they were cutting down on the amount of time they were spending working or doing other important activities. They felt that they were accomplishing less than they would have liked. They're not completing the work as diligently as usual. And 35% reported that the stress that they were experiencing was limiting important social connections with family and friends. And finally, we had caregivers share what are some of their main concerns and challenges that they had been experiencing frequently over the past 6 months. And primary among these, you can see in orange, that orange bar there, was that caregivers were worried about the future. They were, in particular, worried about what the future holds for their loved one. Other objective type burdens included, disruption of family life or household routine, difficulty concentrating. They also shared some subjective type burdens as well, feeling guilty that they weren't doing enough for their loved one or feeling trapped by their caregiving role out of a sense of obligation or duty. So we want to get more deeper into these kinds of challenges. And so Edward is going to describe what we learned from our interviews.
Thank you very much for that, Jen. I will now be presenting some of the themes that we learned from our interviews. We were able to interview 21 participants, and the preliminary themes that emerged from these 21 interviews are presented on the slide. The first theme is personal impact of being a caregiver, and this theme refers to the personal struggles, trade-offs, and sacrifices experienced by caregivers in caring for their family member or loved one. The second theme, personal impact, means stress associated with navigating the system, refers to the system-related multidimensional challenges caregivers encounter in trying to find appropriate services or assistance for their family members or loved ones from qualified mental health professionals. The third theme is complexity of caregiving, and this refers to the complex nature of the caregiving role that recognizes the different personal, professional, ethical, legal, and system issues caregivers face as they provide care for their family members or loved one. The fourth theme, caregivers as buffers of the failings of the system, refers to the activities that caregivers themselves take on because the system is either unable or inadequately equipped to provide care. For example, with wait times, a caregiver looks after their ill family member or provides housing and or to their loved one. The fifth theme, communicating with service providers, refers to caregivers' experiences communicating with their ill family members, loved ones, or service providers. And the last theme, negative emotions related to caregiving, refers to the negative emotions felt by caregivers as a result of their caregiving experience. Although we've outlined these 6 themes, we wanted to emphasize that these themes are not independent by themselves. They are meshed together into one big perspective, which forms part of the caregiving puzzle. In the next few slides, we will be presenting some quotes that best describe each of these themes. For theme 1, personal impact of being a caregiver. Being a caregiver can raise difficult personal issues about duty, responsibility, adequacy, and guilt. The personal impact of caregiving was evident across the 21 interviews we did and was described in terms of how caregivers have had to cope with the illness, dealing with the crises, how to become a caregiver, managing the care of their ill family member, as well as the lifelong responsibility or commitment associated with this responsibility. Some of the quotes that we read and heard from participants are on the slide. Participant 002 said that my loved one doesn't have children. I don't have any kids. And as we're growing older, I find the difficulty of caring for her until she She's in her golden years, and at the same time, I'm also looking forward to retiring. And it seems like I'm retiring to assist her and being with her. And so that's a challenge for me at the moment. Another participant said, I'm not a social worker, and I get a little tired. Like, who else will pick up my loved one and take him to this thing and bring him home? You see, it's almost an impossible thing, isn't it? Nobody else is going to pick up my loved one and take him for groceries, make sure he's got enough food. Sorry. The issue of pervasive and constant worry also emerged as another sub-theme. This participant recounted their loved one's symptoms sometimes come out as anger, which is hard for them. Like, if I get home from a tough day at work and my loved one's not doing well, it's like I don't have my me time. Another participant said, I have my own health challenges that complicate things, so I work through the mud of my stuff while looking after people. My person has become much higher functioning in terms of self-care, able to make meals for themselves, able to self-monitor a lot, to watch out for their triggers, watch out for their red flags, sort of, keep on top of their own situation. So we have a joke that my helicopter has landed. I'm no longer circling and helicoptering. I'm just on the ground with the motor running for if and when I need to lift off again. These other quotes from the participants said, this has been a financial drain that we definitely didn't plan when we took that early retirement. It's likely contributing to me still working as well. Participant 17 said, and I'm just thinking about the future, like not being able to ever afford our own place is always stressful. It's definitely taking a toll on me. Oh, sorry. Oh my. Jen, can you help me with this? Okay. I think I got the buttons suddenly disappeared. So now with theme two, for many of the caregivers who volunteered to be interviewed, they recounted stories of stress associated with navigating the system. And I'll just read some of them in the interest of time. Participant 1 said, if we're driving ourselves crazy trying to find care for the person we are providing care to, there is no help for us. All the work that we do is for nothing because we can't help them by ourselves. We can't prescribe medications. We can only help them when there's a crisis to the limits of our ability. Another participant said, I'm retired, having no access to healthcare services or counseling, so my loved one's illness became an issue again this year. I feel helpless and lost, and it called the family doc, and the family doc wouldn't give him any meds, and it just goes downhill from there. And this participant said, it took us a year to get support from the organization, a year. So often these people leave the hospital and are left on their own and they circle back around. I've asked for him to be put into an organization. There's a program, there's a type of a program, but the only way you can get the counseling or long-term program is if you are readmitted into the hospital, which doesn't make sense to me. My loved one had many suicide attempts and hospitalization. Why is my loved one not a candidate for that? Why does he have to be readmitted into the hospital to have access to that? I don't understand the way things are functioning. For theme 3, complexity of caregiving burden, a participant said, I have in the past thought about giving up my caregiving role, and then it's like he'll get arrested. And well, he's in jail and he's off the drugs. So he comes back to normal and then he gets out. Usually it seems to be 9 days. That's the magic number. Within 9 days, he's gone again. So when as soon as he's gone, that it's I'm done. I'm not gonna help him no more. I can't deal with this. And then he ends up getting picked up by the police, spends a couple of months in jail, and we're back to square one. It's like I feel I'm the only person that he has. I feel like if I don't help him, he's out on the streets. The other participant said, my family had difficulties with the police in the past, and I'm aware of what they're capable of when they're confronted with violence. Anything can happen. So to try and minimize the stigma, because it does hit like a pathogen from the air that you didn't see, it just lands on you. So yeah, another crisis would please God, no. And this participant here said, if I wasn't there to pitch in, then I honestly think he might end up on the street. I really have no idea what would happen to him. And then I feel super guilty about that. And it's just that negative thought pattern of like, what if, what if, what if? So that's been like a huge source of stress for me. Caregivers as buffers of the failings of the system. One participant said that there is nothing on weekends. Mental health does not stop at 5:00 p.m. and restart the next morning. It doesn't stop on a Friday evening and restart on Mondays. Like, I don't understand how they expect families to deal with all this when there's nothing available on evenings or weekends. In terms of communicating with service providers, this participant said, I think as a caregiver, it's so important to be in the loop. However, I know there's the Mental Health Act, rights and privacy, but maybe that should be changed. So yeah, just communication with the caregiver has to be almost as important, I would think, as the communication with the patient, because the patient isn't exactly in the right state of mind. I think at the beginning stages, more emphasis on the caregiver's role and how they can actually help their loved one. Because when my loved one came home from the hospital, I was relying on my own education and I was coming up with plans for how to care for him. And that was like pretty daunting. We will be sharing the slides with you. I'd like to read this other quote from a participant. Like, the family doctor just kind of said to us, oh well, no attention to that detail is what's concerning for me. And it is. We've been bounced around because we're older. So the family doctor that I trusted for 50 years has retired, of course, like me. And we've had to move to 3 different family doctors in the last couple of years. So there's that lack of continuity of care. In terms of the negative emotions associated with caregiving, it was not uncommon for caregivers to experience negative emotions. Participant 10 said, devastated is probably the best way or a bit of a relief, because for the most part, you run across empathetic people, but you'd also come across those people that would look at you like, why can't you control this child? And so work was never free of the burden of being a parent, because I interact with so many people, and there was a special care teams that would come into the classroom. I had also dealt with them, so everybody knew all this. It was all very public. So there's a bit of embarrassment, isn't the right word, but it's similar to that. And you feel you should be able to help. And when you can't help your own child, it's pretty devastating. Okay. Something is going wrong with my...
I'll get it, Edward. Hang on just a sec.
Oh, is it happening for you as well?
I can keep advancing your slides. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Another participant noted, when my loved one is depressed, I feel lonely because he's not getting out of bed. And when he's in his mania mode, he's like busy, 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 trying to catch up with everything. So then I feel lonely again because he's busy, being busy, you know, and being good. But you're happy to see they're out and doing things, but then you're like, hello, over here. So yeah, next slide, please. At times I feel really guilty, but I wonder if I had met someone else, what would my life be like? I sometimes feel a bit trapped because I think if I left, who would take care of my loved one? So from these interviews, we drew the following conclusions. Caregiving is an ongoing, isolating role. Caregivers' experiences of caregiving are closely related to their ill family members' experiences of their illness. If their person or their loved one is okay, they are okay. Their experience of caregiving is okay. But if their person or their loved one is having a hard time, they too are having a hard time. Another thing that that emerged for us from these data was that caregivers require support navigating the system for their loved one, and that caregivers also require support for themselves. Next slide, please. And so in ending this presentation, I wanted to draw your attention to this invitation for the next phase of the study. All of you who have kindly attended the Caring for the Caregiver conference will be invited to complete an online survey about your satisfaction with the event. Participants who provided their email address during the conference registration will receive an email following the conference with a link to complete the online survey. We will also be inviting about 10 to 15 participants for a brief interview to hear about your experiences with the conference. And these results will inform future Caring for the Caregiver conference events. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Edward. So many important findings from this study. We could go on, and we'll be sharing more of these results on our Caregiving Resource Hub website. So stay tuned for more information on this study and where you can find those resources after the conference.